Welcome, everybody. This is SUNY SAIL's webinar on mindfulness in times of crisis. We know we have over 200 people registered for this webinar, so we're very, very thrilled that we can offer this. First, I want to thank the SUNY SAIL Institute for putting this webinar together. I think this is much needed in the time of the COVID-19 crisis, where people have financial issues, their families might be sick or also experiencing financial difficulties. So this is a very much needed webinar, and absolutely thrilled to be joined by two of the most highly distinguished mindfulness practitioners and teachers in the SUNY system, Dr. Kristen Blinney from SUNY Oneonta and Dr. Terry Murray from SUNY New Paltz. So thank you for joining. We'll have more information about SUNY SAIL webinars and activities later on, so please stick around for that. But first, I would like to introduce Dr. Kristen Blinney, who is going to lead us in a meditation practice to start off this webinar.
Thank you so much, Glenn. And I just want to second what you said to thank the SUNY SAIL and to all the participants that are taking the time out of your lives today to join us. I truly hope that you and your loved ones are safe and well during these very difficult times. So to get us started with the meditation, first and foremost, I'd like to ask you to notice how you're sitting right now. You don't have to change anything, but I noticed myself when I was thinking about doing a meditation, I was paying attention to my posture, and I have my legs crossed. I'm kind of engaged in what I would call slumpasana in yoga. Not the best posture. So I'd like to invite you to explore your posture and just notice if you can find a comfortable sitting position to get us started today. So I would encourage you to keep your feet flat on the floor, unless you're standing, in which case you would occupy a different bodily position. You might rest your hands on your desk or table or even on your thighs. And you might also bring your body into an upright position so that you're not overly rigid, so that you're uncomfortable or straining, but just to have a smooth flow of breath energy. Once you find that position, you have the option, of course, of keeping your eyes opened or closed. If you decide to keep your eyes open, you might find a focal point to work with, and just to have a soft gaze. And once you do that, now I'd like to invite you to just start noticing the sensation of what it feels like to be in the body posture you are. If you're sitting, start to notice the way your feet feel on the floor and the way your body connects with your chair. If you're standing, you can still notice the position of your body in space, grounding into the floor. And just see that, bring that awareness fully into those sensations. Now, I'd like to invite you to check in and just see how you're feeling right now. Emotionally, energetically, physically. Just acknowledge whatever feelings come up in this moment. Now bring your awareness to your breath. You don't need to change it in any way, just notice. You might notice that your breath is smooth or choppy, that it's deep or shallow. You might notice the way the inhalation and exhalation feel as it enters and exits your body. Again, you don't need to change anything, just notice. Now let's expand our awareness to bring some conscious presence to our breath. And I'm going to lead you through a short visualization that relates to an alternate nostril breathing practice, for those of you that are familiar with this practice. While you will still be breathing through both nostrils, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're breathing through one at a time. And let's start with our right side. So with your next inhalation, imagine that you are inhaling through your right nostril and then exhaling through your left nostril. And at the bottom of that exhalation, let's inhale through our left side and then exhale through our right side. At the bottom of that exhalation, then inhale again through your right side and exhale through your left. And then inhale again through your left and exhale through your right. Let's do 1 or 2 more rounds of that at your own pace. If you find that your awareness has begun to wander, just bring it back to imagining your breath through both nostrils, suspending that effort. Perhaps you might give yourself a verbal marker, rising or falling, breathing in or out. I now invite you to take a deep inhalation and exhale. You might even consider exhaling through your mouth. Let's do another deep inhalation and exhale. Now let's bring our awareness. We're going to rewind back in time today to the minute we woke up this morning. Try to bring yourself back into your space, into your bed, wherever you were sleeping, and just bring yourself into that space and see if you can notice any sensations, how you were feeling, if you remember any of the first thoughts that you had this morning. Once you are in that space, and perhaps it's just a feeling more than a visualization, begin to move through your day at your own pace. Just from that moment of when you woke up, what did you do next? What were your rituals or your routines? What interactions did you have as you moved through your space? And just touch on each of those experiences as if you were fast forwarding through your day, not moving so fast that you don't actually get to bring awareness to those moments, but just acknowledging where you've been thus far before arriving in this moment. When you do arrive at this moment, depending on the number of things that you've done already today, bring that awareness back into your body and into the chair, just noticing that point of connection, the sensation of your body. You might pay attention to any of the sounds that you hear in your space. And with that, I'd like to ask you to extend that awareness and to think about anything that you might currently feel gratitude for at this moment. I know during these difficult times, with all the things we have going on in our day-to-day lives, it can be very helpful, at least in my experience, to try and pay attention to the things that we might sometimes take for granted and that we are grateful for. It could be one thing, it could be many, many things. To cultivate that sense of gratitude. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, perhaps instead you might try to bring a sense of loving kindness into this moment. And that loving kindness, I hope that you can direct towards yourself, but also potentially to those that you love and those that you may have no connection with. And when you feel complete with that, I invite you to take another deep inhalation and exhale. And let's do 2 more at your own pace. Deep inhalation and exhale. Deep inhalation and exhale. And when you feel complete and comfortable, again, you might slowly bring some movement into your body. And when you're ready, if your eyes are closed, slowly start to open them, noticing any difference, if at all, in how you're feeling in this present moment. Thank you so much.
Let's see. Thank you very much, Kristen. We appreciate that. I told everyone that Kristen is one of the best meditation teachers in the SUNY system, and that's your first time meditating. Don't worry if your mind was all over the place and you had trouble focusing. That's fine. Part of meditation is being compassionate to oneself. So even if you didn't follow the whole thing through, that is fine. Just be easy and compassionate to yourself and be kind to yourself. As Kristen said, we're all going through tough times and this is a lot to deal with. So hopefully meditation and mindfulness will be something that you can use to incorporate into your life, both personal and professional, to help yourself to be more loving, kind to others and to yourself as well. Just want to give a little background about mindfulness and the SUNY system before we start. One of the first organizations that hosted or put together mindfulness for the entire SUNY system was the SUNY Contemplative Network. It was founded in 2012 by 8 leaders, including our very own Dr. Terry Murray, who was a pioneer of mindfulness in the SUNY system, and also Dr. Lisa Napora from the University of Buffalo. We'll hear more about her later. Also, we have a SUNY Board of Trustee, Joseph Belloc, who is a huge proponent of mindfulness in the SUNY system, and he was integral in the SUNY Contemplative Network. And the SUNY Contemplative Network sponsored annual conferences and brought together faculty and staff from both public and private higher institutions with the goal of infusing more mindfulness and contemplative practices in SUNY system. As I mentioned before, Dr. Lisa Naparo is one of the co-founders of the SUNY Contemplative Network. She is one of the pioneers, in my opinion, in the SUNY system with infusing mindfulness into systems and into organizations. She's currently the co-founder and director of the Mindfulness Alliance. She's also a visiting scholar of the Department of Learning and Instruction at the University of Buffalo. And she's also a board member for the Center for the Contemplative Mind in Society. She was unable to be with us today, but she wanted to send her regards and leave us with a quote. And as we make decisions as leaders, as we're working during this stressful time, she encourages us to use mindful practices because they're effective at increasing resilience, decreasing stress and anxiety, supporting our minds in order to make better decisions. So if you're interested in more of her work, her link to her website is themindfulalliance.org, and her email address is lnaparo@buffalo.edu. Napara, excuse me. Dr. Naparo was also very integral in launching the first SUNY-wide mindfulness conference for everybody in the SUNY system. This is back in 2016 at the University of Buffalo. This conference brought together scholars, practitioners, teachers, researchers. Dr. David Vago is one of the preeminent researchers in the field of mindfulness from the Harvard Medical School. Dr. Joseph Bullock was also there, a trustee of the State University in New York. Daniel Barbazat as well gave a great presentation. So this was really a jumping point off of the foundation with the SUNY Contemplative Network created. Moving on to mindfulness in higher education, not only in the SUNY system has mindfulness been working and organizing to grow bigger and bigger. There's also other mindfulness centers across the nation. Probably the most preeminent one is the Center for Mindfulness at the UMass Memorial Healthcare. That is founded by a guy named Jon Kabat-Zinn. If you're unfamiliar with Jon Kabat-Zinn, he is a medical doctor and he's widely regarded as the father of mindfulness in the Western society. I mentioned Dr. David Vago before. He leads the Mindfulness Research Collaborative at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. The Center for Contemplative Mind Society is the preeminent organization, which is closely related to the Association for Contemplative Minds in Higher Education. Naropa University is a university solely dedicated to mindfulness out in Colorado. Dr. Terry Murray, who you'll hear from later, actually was visiting scholar there. The Brown Center for Mindfulness, as well as the Contemplative Science Center at the University of Virginia, are also two big mindfulness centers throughout higher education in this country. In terms of leadership, mindfulness also plays an integral part in leadership. That has been springing up all over the place. The Institute for Mindful Leadership is a big mindful training program. The Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute was founded by the former HR director at Google. Although it focuses mainly on leadership, it uses a lot of mindful practices to help develop our next generation of leaders. Our mindful leadership organization also does a tremendous amount of leadership training. They're actually hosting a free summit. It's from May 4th to May 8th. It's a workplace mindfulness summit. It's absolutely free. We'll send you the information on the link to that if you'd like to register. So just want to go over some brief definitions before we get going. There's a lot of talk about mindfulness and meditation. What's the difference between the two? So simply, mindfulness is the act of paying attention to the present moment non-judgmentally. Another way of thinking about it is our human condition is basically being lost in thought. The same way our heart keeps pumping blood, our brain keeps pumping thoughts. So we are perpetually go along in life as just having these thoughts just keep pumping. You could probably recognize that if you had a stressful day and you're trying to go to sleep and your mind just can't stop racing. That's basically being mindless, if you will. Being mindful is not stopping the thoughts per se, but sort of distancing yourself away from your thoughts a little bit and having some reprieve from that. So mindfulness practices, anything that focuses you on the present moment. It could be yoga, painting, sports, even eating. There's something called mindful eating, mindful listening. Dr. Blinny will talk a little bit later about the importance of mindfulness and communication. And the difference between mindfulness and meditation is a practice to become more mindful. I see it as the way you do personal training for your body. Meditation is attention training for your mind. So we just went through a presentation, mindfulness meditation with Dr. Blinny, and she did a great job of helping us train our mind to be more cognizant of what we're going throughout, what we're thinking about, and our awareness throughout the day. So I just want to do a formal introduction of Dr. Kristen Blinny. She's the Associate Professor of Communication Studies at SUNY She is a certified yoga and meditation teacher. She is a member of the Mindfulness and Education Network, the National Communication Association, and the Association for the Contemplative Mind in Society. And as of last year, she was a recipient of the 2019 National Communication Association Presidential Citation for Service. And she does a tremendous amount of service above and beyond her duties as an associate professor at SUNY Oneonta, and we're so happy to have her here today. Our next presenter, as I mentioned before, is a pioneer in the SUNY system in terms of mindfulness. He is the Associate Professor Emeritus of Humanistic Multicultural Education at SUNY New Paltz. As I mentioned, he is the co-founder of the SUNY Contemplative Network and the SUNY New Paltz Faculty Staff Contemplative Network. He was a visiting scholar at Naropa University. He also was the instructor in the SUNY New Paltz Chongqing University of Educational Partnership. He also taught in Chongqing in China from 2017 to 2019. We're very honored to have Dr. Murray present to us, and he will do a presentation about his workshop on In Here, Out There. Dr. Murray?
Okay, thanks, Glenn. If you could close your PowerPoint screen share for a minute so I can launch mine. Great. I also get to see everybody out there. Okay. So before I launch the PowerPoint, it's just so good to be with you all. I appreciate you all joining us. Like you, I've just sought ways to meet my own needs and concerns, but also reach out into the world and try to address some of the needs and concerns that are out there. So these kind of gatherings have been incredibly helpful. on a personal note, right now I'm feeling like I'm living in two worlds, and maybe you can relate to this, kind of in here, in the safety but the isolation of my home, where I'm blessed to be safe and well with my wife. But there's a world out there that I venture out into with concerns and reservations, to try to connect from a distance with my family, to shop, but also knowing out there all the suffering that's going on, all the struggles that are going on. And so living with that dichotomy, seeming dichotomy. So right now, my wife and I should have been going to Chongqing, China in 3 weeks. Obviously that did not happen. Ironically, our friends and our colleagues and the students there in Chongqing are just emerging from a 6-week isolation and starting to tentatively move out into the world. The university is online like we are. They haven't opened their face-to-face classes. We also have Chinese students here who can't get home, but are isolated here. We have a friend who's a faculty member in Chongqing here on a year of research with her 10-year-old son. Her husband visited, went home, and then they closed down flights. So she's here in isolation, and back there at home, her husband and the rest of the world is starting to emerge. I'm teaching a qualitative research course, and just as my students were heading into the field, we had spring break, and then everything shifted online and they shifted to home. So the challenges of supporting them, in some cases, I had to create an alternative study, which actually focuses on people's experiences of COVID-19. So every day, a new level unfolds with these challenges. So I'm going to bring up my screen. And I'd like to do a couple things in the brief time we have. First of all, introduce what for me has become a really helpful model to understand and respond to the current challenges of living in this time of COVID-19. Second, I want to explore what happens when we react rather than respond to the challenges that we're facing both personally and professionally. And finally, I want to explore what happens when we I want to explore some of the inner attitudes and skills that we can use to respond in healthy, productive ways to challenges out there in a world turned upside down. So we've heard a couple of different terms so far, and this is pretty common. We've heard the term mindfulness. Many of you are also familiar with the term contemplation being used more and more. And I appreciate this broader term of contemplation because mindfulness is more specific, really, really valuable. But contemplation is universal. It's inclusive, it's secular, it's sacred. So as a starting definition, to contemplate is to connect with what's meaningful, cultivating a critical focus through presence, stillness, humility, sustained attention, and inquiry. So a lot of my work as a faculty member and a colleague in the contemplative community focused on trying to bring this idea of contemplation to life. A couple things I think are really helpful to recognize about contemplative theory and practice. We rarely, unless we're worried, stressed, think about our inner life. It's a place that sometimes we go to, but usually not as a calm, productive place. So a contemplative approach connects our inner and outer experience, and to what degree do they connect? Are they congruent? Are we walling out the outside world and trying to function on two different levels? How can we bring those together? Secondly, contemplative theory and practice complements what really is the dominant way of knowing in our society, and that's the rational, the linear, the logical, focusing on problem solving. As we're discovering, we can't navigate our current situation just with our mind. So if we are aware and integrate the sensory, the emotional, the intuitive into our actions and our interactions, we have a broader, richer toolkit of approaches to dealing with what's going on. It's also secular. It draws on a range of wisdom traditions around the world, and I love the inclusiveness of this approach. It honors the sacred, but can be approached in a secular way too. So if we approach things contemplatively, it helps us to focus our attention, which is really, really challenging right now. It makes us aware of our emotions through identifying and acknowledging our bodily sensations. When we feel that tightness in our chest, in our shoulders, in our necks, how is that impacting our ability to function? How can we let go of that? It fosters compassion, not only for others, but ourselves, giving ourselves a break as we navigate this time. How to regulate our own emotions. How to reflect, how to have insights without judging, without limiting. How to think beyond ourselves. And it's really hard in this time of isolation not to get hooked into just self-interest. How can we transcend that and take care of ourselves, but also be out there in the world and responding? And finally, and I'll come back to this, how do we respond rather than react to stressful situations? So right now, we're confronted with a new situation that is new to all of us. None of us were around during the Spanish flu, which is quite often used as a point of comparison. So we're in a situation that puts us in new, uncharted terrain. If we can't find ways to develop and apply contemplative mindful skills for navigating this challenge, which is personal, social, emotional, economic, political, we tend to do some non-productive things. We shut down, we go inward, we avoid, we get confused, we get defensive, we feel alone, we feel fear, we lash out in anger against others. These are human, but obviously they're not productive, they're not healthy, they're not helpful. So here's where that idea of in here, out there comes to life. We need to learn and work in here within ourselves on the inner skills we need, but also in the isolation of being at home with presence and compassion. But we also need to be out there responding to a world filled with stress, fear, frustration, uncertainty. We need to learn to navigate ambiguity, contradiction, and the unknown. So what are some of the skills that we can draw on that are gifts of the inner work of contemplative and mindfulness practice? Grounding and centering, and I'll come back to that. Observing, describing, not interpreting, observing what's going on. Mindful communication, pausing, not being afraid of silence, leaving room for that and what can be learned through silence. Non-judgmental self-awareness, being compassionate with self and others, building community, and we're getting better at how to do that virtually, and creating safe, supportive, inclusive spaces. So out of all that list, I want to share 5 with you as things that if you can reflect on, consider, practice, and employ, will help you respond to the situations out there, but also what's going on in your own life in here. So the first one is grounding. Just how do we consciously connect with our body and our physical presence? When we ground, you anchor yourself in the present moment. It's so easy to get drawn into the past wistfully or fears of the future. How do we be present? You can ground yourself by, whether you're in a physical meeting, a virtual meeting, whether you're at home, just recognizing, acknowledging where you are in that present moment. Paying attention to your physical presence by literally grounding your feet to the floor, feeling that connection. And as we work out that grounding, being aware of where in our body we are tight, we are resisting, acknowledging that and trying to let go and just simply be in that present moment. So we ground and then we center. And centering is an internal tool. We move inward It's a process that allows us to set aside thoughts of the past or the future. When we're centered, again, we can focus on what's going on here and now. So, key to centering is just paying attention to our breath. Thank goodness we don't have to think about our breath, it functions. But what happens when we very intently focus on the in-breath and the out-breath and the quality of that breath? Focusing on our breath brings us to the present. It brings in the oxygen we need, helps release the stress. So, when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling stressed, when we feel challenged to make an important decision, taking that moment to pause and just breathe. Third skill is the simple but critical act of listening. If we do nothing else but to listen to others, to really listen, it's an incredible gift. So when we listen, we have three challenges. One, we need to create a space where thoughts and feelings and beliefs can be shared honestly, without judgment and in confidence. We need to honor the speaker as he or she formulates, articulates, clarifies, owns, shares what they're holding inside. And that act is absolutely critical. Fourth, not judging ourselves or others and finding that compassion. And that's so hard right now, and it's so easy to judge decisions that are being made in the world, in our universities, in our states, in our cities, in our homes, when we disagree. So how can we be accepting and compassionate about others and our own beliefs, actions, and interactions? And finally, and I've mentioned this several times, when we ground and center, when we listen, when we don't judge, we're more capable of responding, not reacting from center and with clear intention. So those 5 tools, if we can start to integrate them intentionally into our work, can help us as we just navigate this uncertain time of being in here and out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. We appreciate that wonderful presentation. Those 5 keys to being more mindful and developing those contemplative practices to help us during this situation. You mentioned your last key to being more mindful is to respond and not react. And Kristen's going to talk to us a little bit about a concept that she came up with called meta communication, METTA communication.
Well, thank you, Glenn and Terry, for the beautiful foundation that you laid as far as this conversation. It's great to learn from you and to hear about these ideas and to be part of this conversation. I think this is a particularly challenging time in the realm of communication, I think, for all of us, for many of the reasons that both of you mentioned. As someone who focuses on teaching communication and studying it, you can really see the very direct impact our communication has on the quality of our life. And in this moment where communication can feel very divisive or cut off from others, or even enhanced through the connection we have with our communities, there's still a lot of challenges that we might confront when navigating this landscape. Which leads me to this concept of meta communication, which is a term that I utilize a lot in my work. It's a listening centered kind of communication that I'm going to just briefly define for you, and then offer a series of kind of meta communication micro practices that I think will build on what's already been discussed. So as previously introduced, when we talk about the term meta communication with 1 T, meta, coined by Gregory Bateson, is really, when we're talking about it in the landscape of communication, we're really thinking about any kind of communication that occurs where we are communicating about the communication interaction itself, or the communication is conveying something about the communicators. it's really an opportunity for us to study our communication as it's unfolding, even as we're reflecting on it after an interaction has occurred. So for me, this is a vital part of just studying our day-to-day communication, is paying attention to how we do it and what are the impacts of that. When we start bridging it with this term metta, M-E-T-T-A, a Pali word from the wisdom tradition of Buddhism, we're thinking about what this means. It actually means a kind of loving kindness. Some also kind of translate it as a kind of unconditional friendliness. So when I build this into this broader term, metta, M-E-T-T-A, communication, what I'm actually referring to is a kind of communication where we are not only thinking about our communication as a tool and process for relating, with the recognition that every communication interaction we have has the capacity to create, maintain, or even potentially dissolve a relationship one conversation at a time, then we can think about this type of communication as a way to start to pay attention to how our interactions are unfolding in the moment, so that we can hopefully bring a more loving kindness or friendliness approach to it across our differences. It could be said that when we think about kind of communicative conflicts, we could think about those as moments where we might read our differences as a problem. And that, as was previously discussed, gives us a space where we might immediately move to being more shut down versus open, blocking our capacity to engage more of a we first versus a me first approach. So let's look at this more practically in terms of how this might play out in our day-to-day lives. So as Terry was talking about, we can really see the importance of listening when we think about any type of communicative interaction as it relates to mindfulness. And I like to think of listening as a multi-sensory approach, not as something that's just tied to a hearing process, but instead something that we do in a very embodied way. We listen with our whole being. And I think of it primarily in 4 different realms or listening ecologies that are happening simultaneously. So right now, not only am I speaking, but I'm also thinking, right? I have that happening. And I have those processes engaging all the time. And if we were in a conversation where you were also speaking with me, you can see it even becomes more complex. So if we start to think about how we can actually build short practices around enhancing our listening within our interactions as a practice of meta communication, some ways that we can do it, or we can start with in either direction, but I like to start with my body, right? Just checking in, noticing how am I breathing. Hopefully I am breathing. I notice that in moments of stress, I personally tend to hold my breath, or your breath might get more shallow. So when we start listening with our whole being, we can start noticing in our communicative interactions, how is our breath changing? How is our energy changing? How is our posture changing? I notice too, like for myself personally, when I'm stressed, I might clench my toes, or when I'm driving, I might feel enhanced tension in my solar plexus area or in the diaphragm. So we can start building listening in small little ways, just in that landscape of the body in very significant manner. You might be noticing that right now, just in your own body, posture, and breath. I like to think of stories. The next realm is thinking about the ways in which our thoughtscape, right? What are the stories that we're telling ourselves each day? How are we interacting with stories? And one of my yoga teachers, Rod Stryker, asked the question, if you could take 1 hour each day and not engage in any negative and or self-critical thinking, would you be able to do it? And this is a question I like to ask myself a lot. Sometimes, especially in times of stress, people can be quite hard on themselves. So when I think about listening to our stories, I think about listening to our self-talk. What are we saying to ourselves? How are we carrying that? I talk about this a lot in my classes. It's this idea of like, you say something and then for the rest of the day, some people may replay that thing that they said that they wish they hadn't have said, or they hadn't said it in that way. So what are we looping in that thoughtscape? So to really build ways that we might listen to that. And of course, our relationship sounds easy to listen to our relationships, what they're teaching us and telling us, but actually I think it can be quite a challenge, especially when we are constantly multitasking, or we may have struggles with certain relationships. We become different versions of ourselves in each encounter. And so listening to our relationships is really asking us to do a lot of different things, which will be the focus of the other components of this conversation. So I'll come back to that. And then lastly, of course, the listening ecology of the environment. It's just asking us to listen to what we have surrounding us. What are some barriers to our listening that might come about when we're trying to reduce distraction, but then we hear the sound of an HVAC system, or there's the cat crying at the door, or things that constantly pull our attention in and out of spaces. And learning to tune into what those distractions are and to, in essence, transcend them is a practice, a mindful practice that can help us as we navigate meta communication in our relationships, especially when we have a challenging conversation at hand. So that leads me to the next part, which again, this is links to all 4 of those listening ecologies, but is important when I think about meta communication is I like to think about how we can better explore communication patterns. Most of us do communication in a pattern way. We have specific patterns that we build in each of our relationships. And I know for me, just as an example, sometimes my mother likes to talk to me about the weather. She lives in Florida. And I sometimes get triggered by that because she's trying to express love and care by telling me to bring a coat with me to work, or that it's snowing in New York. And sometimes I get stuck in the space of, I'm here, I know, I'm in my 40s, thank you, Mom, I love you. But it gives me an opportunity that has taught me a lot. It's noticing when I move out of a zone in my patterns where I get stuck in them in ways that I'm performing in a relationship in ways I don't want to. I'm not acknowledging what's actually happening. I'm getting stuck on a part of the communication that isn't really the meaning behind what's being meant there. So there's lots of ways we can explore communication patterns. It's a kind of tracking and self-study that we can do. We can notice how we listen, when we listen best. We can start looking at in our relationships at when we feel like we are not communicating well with people and why, what we consider to be good communication or meaningful, what our communication needs are, what our conflict styles are, and how we run into some of the same conversations over and over and over again. There's all kinds of ways that we can do that. I personally like to talk about my feelings at midnight before bed. My partner doesn't always do best at that time for having a conversation that's very deep and about our relationship. So we have to shift those patterns so we can meet each other where we are. And that's true of many of our relationships. The next one that I just want to mention, and this is a 3 of the 5, is that when we think about meta communication, cultivating a kind of loving kindness in our interactions, if our goal is indeed to enhance the relationship or to listen in a way where we're trying to understand someone's point of view, especially if it's different or if we're in a challenging conversation, which I think, again, we're having more and more of those play out. And it can be very difficult to bridge that gap when someone has a completely different political view or you don't understand where they're coming from. I know we're seeing that a lot in this moment where we have people in many ways in the camp of they want to stay home and they want to protect themselves and their families and others. And then we have others that are ready to open things up and they have a different, we're coming from a different world. And so how do we travel into those worlds across those differences? As easy as this one might sound, I think it's also quite a challenge, is to remember that our model of reality is only one among many. I often think of Wade Davis, who says that the anthropologist Wade Davis, who says that we are a prisoner of our own perceptions, right? We can find ourselves quite easily in very narrow reality tunnels, which in essence block us from seeing other ways of being together and to bridging those divides. We don't have to agree with each other or support the other viewpoint to try to understand it. So I think this one is really about cultivating a little bit of doubt so that we create some willingness to learn from and potentially be changed by others. It's this idea that another person is not a failed version of us, as Davis would say. It's an invitation to see what can I learn from someone else. Which leads me to this idea that in meta communication, I always hope that we can find ways that we can cultivate curiosity and to embrace uncertainty. Now, I know a lot of people don't typically want to say, sign me up for a day where I have no control over anything and I have no idea what's going to happen. Not everyone feels as comfortable with flying into the face of the unknown in that way. But I'd like to invite you to at least consider the possibility that uncertainty can be a really beautiful catalyst for action and understanding, because it does potentially offer us a place to try to learn more. So I see this play out a lot in conflict scenarios in communication. People might move immediately to shutting down versus trying to see, like, what is it about this claim that this person is making? Where are they coming from with this? How did they arrive here? What's the kind of meaning behind this message that got them to this place of thinking in this way? I recognize that that is asking for some additional labor for some people to do that extra work in this capacity. But again, we're talking about meta communication, trying to bridge a gap, to create connection, to build loving kindness in an interaction. And I think curiosity and uncertainty really can assist us to think about it a little differently. And finally, this is the last of the 5. And again, thinking of this broadly and hopefully experientially, you can start to see some ways that these might be possible within your day-to-day communicating, is to remember that we can't control an interaction, but we can contemplate our impact. And I think that that relates very closely to what Terry was saying about this relationship between reacting versus responding. We occupy a very different communication stance when we listen to understand versus listen to respond. This is also true with any communication interaction. Each one is always going to have an impact. What W. Barnett Pierce refers to as kind of like the afterlife of communication. Some afterlives have a much longer time frame that they sit with us than others. So someone may say something to you that really hurts you very deeply, and you may hold on to that all day. It may be a week or two. It may permanently damage your relationship, or depending on the communication itself, that afterlife may stay with you your whole life. And that's something that is really an important part of thinking about meta communication, is to be mindful of our impact that we might be having on others, the afterlife that we're creating. Every communication interaction, again, while we cannot control what other people do, we can, to the best of our ability, start to make choices about how we react and respond to these interactions. And that's where this triangle comes in, this idea of compassion, empathy, and kindness. I see those as interrelated in the sense that compassion invites us to acknowledge suffering in ourselves and others, to recognize it, but also when building a bridge to empathy, to think about how we can not only recognize the suffering, but see it through another person's eyes. And when I link that to the idea of kindness, I think about the ways in which we can make that actionable in our interactions. And I think that's really where the idea of being aware of our impact can be a major move forward to helping to create a more we-focused communication versus a me-focused stance. So the last thing I'll say, so that we can get into a space for questions, is to take all of these ideas that I've just mentioned from these different listening ecologies, to cultivating some doubt in our own views so that we can learn from and be changed by others, and also recognizing that there are very specific things that we can do. I like to think of it as this practice everyday acts of compassion and empathy. So teaching peace on a very micro level. There's just simple steps. You find yourself in a difficult conversation or in a difficult moment, and this can be even a difficult moment you're having with yourself. To the best of our ability, first and foremost, just pause. Stop what you're doing. Try to do something that comes unnaturally to jostle those patterns potentially. So pause. And then it's always nice to bring awareness to our breath. It can be quite helpful to create a relaxation response, to extend our exhale in that process, so in a kind of resetting way. And then we can acknowledge Acknowledge whatever it is we're feeling in that moment. Wow, I feel really tired. I feel really frustrated. Whatever it is, acknowledge it as an act so that we can start moving into this space where we might be able to better contemplate the communication choices we're making. I think most of us probably know when we're getting ready to bring out our worst self, or when we might be provoking another person's worst self. Another way of saying that is that in a communication interaction, if you're making something worse, this might be a good time to stop and go back to pause, exhale, acknowledge, contemplate your choices before you actually engage, because we don't want to always find ourselves trapped in what Pierce would call critical moments, moments where something that we have said or done changes the nature of the relationship in ways that it cannot ever go back to the place that it was before. And that can be low stakes or that can be high stakes, depending on the afterlife of that encounter. So I hope that this is a useful framework for you to potentially attempt in your day-to-day lives. There's a lot more I can say, and I'm always welcome for you to reach out to me at any time to discuss any of these ideas further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I think that was very helpful, informative for our participants to have practical steps they can take in their everyday, both professional and personal lives, to be more kind, more empathetic, and more compassionate to other people. As we adjust to this new normal that we're going to, we don't know what the future may hold, but I'm hoping that people are more interested in self-care, in being more mindful, being more kind, and being more compassionate to themselves first, and extending that kindness, care, and love and compassion to other people. I'm excited that the mindfulness and contemplative practices are resurging and becoming more and more popular in our everyday vernacular and what's going on in the media. In fact, Governor Cuomo just a couple weeks ago signed an agreement with Headspace, which is an app that does meditation, to provide free meditation to all New Yorkers. And I'm really, really excited and inspired by both Dr. Blinny and Dr. Murray, and a lot of the other people that are doing great work with mindfulness and contemplative practices. I'm so glad that Dr. Murray and Dr. Blinny can join us today. They're all stars in the SUNY system. And that's really what SUNY SAIL does, is bring together experts that we have. We have so many smart, really educated people that can help us live more peaceful, meaningful, and compassionate lives out there. So I just want to open up the floor in the chat room for some questions, and then we're going to pass it over to Marissa McCasty, who is the Leadership Development Manager, to tell us a little bit more about some of SUNY SAIL's offerings that you might be interested in. So we'll see if there's any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Glenn. This is Carolyn. So glad that you were able to pull together what a wonderful panel this has been. I'm seeing lots of great comments and feedback from the group. Not so many questions so far, so just everyone know if you have a question for Glenn or either of his facilitators, please let us know. And lots of questions about whether this will be available after today. And so thank you for being open to us recording this and allowing everyone to share this. I think this has been a great use of 1 hour on a Friday afternoon. I think we all needed this, at least I did. And you've given us a lot to think about and tools to be able to get through this. Thank you. Here's a question. Do you have any tips for helping those who have some self-doubt during these times? I'm trying to help a college student.
Okay. Kristen or Dr. Murray or Dr. Blinny, anybody want to take that?
I guess that they're not alone, that so many people are experiencing that. And it's easy to feel that you're the only person in the world who's going through this exact thing. So I think opportunities like this to connect virtually. I've used Zoom more the last 2 months than I ever thought I would. So just, you're not alone. Reach out.
Great. Another question, we're surrounded by the coronavirus. How do we take a break from these daunting problems and shift our thinking, change our focus?
Well, I would just say exactly what Dr. Murray said. Out there, we realize there's so much going on that we can't control. So we could turn a negative situation into a positive one. So we realize that developing an introspective, contemplative, more mindful life, it's really a great opportunity for us to focus on ourselves, not in a selfish way. I think self-care is actually one of the least selfish things you could do. Because if you develop that positive energy inside, that love and the care, that kindness, then you'll spread that to other people. When you walk in a room, you should want to be a positive light in that room. What Dr. Blenny was talking about, if you realize that you're bringing something negative to a situation, that's a good time to stop. So realizing that there's a lot going on outside, to use Dr. Murray's rubric, is to focus on what's going on in here, in your own thoughts, in your own heart. And it's a wonderful time to develop more mindful practices. And I hope this is just the start of what we could do for people in the SUNY system, for leaders to develop more emotional intelligence and develop better decision-making skills. And for people just on a human level to be less stressed, more calm. And if we work on each individual person, the way I look at it is, we have 19 million people in New York State. If each person is more kind, loving, caring, compassionate, the whole state, hopefully that follows that same lead, and we can develop a real loving, kind, and peaceful world. And it sounds like a utopia, but I think it definitely is possible, moving from what Dr. Blenny was saying, from a me-based society to a we-based society.
That's wonderful, Glenn.
And I would add, if it's okay, just briefly, I know with all that's going on, I like to think of it as terms of building on what Glenn was saying, just trying to find things that nourish us right now, outside of all of the news and the things that are going on. And those, when we try to find things that nourish us, they can be things that we can bring contemplative energy to that we might not normally recognize as a mindfulness practice. And that could be something as simple as taking naps every day. Something that nourishes us, right, as a practice of self-care. So there's a lot that can be done.
Glenn, I just thought of something else. As I said, my wife and I are both teaching online courses right now. Hers are short. They're an hour and 15 minutes twice a week, and mine is longer. It's almost 3 hours. But taking time at the beginning of the class to check in with people, not about the course, but about their life. I remember the first time we met online after mid-March, we spent about 45 minutes, and we just went around. And I learned so much about the context of the students' lives, and it really helped me rethink and readjust my expectations of them. But I think they also feel heard. So if they were doing well, great. But if they were challenged, and some people had family members who had the virus, and they were, playing that helping role. So just taking time in the class to focus on the person, not just the student, and letting them share and trying to put yourself in their shoes.
Thank you. I know people are heading out. It's the top of the hour now, but I just want to make sure Marissa has a chance to promote the next program, because I think this audience would really find some value in it. Marissa?
Thank you, Carolyn. We are going to be doing every third Thursday at noon. We do our Leaders Learning Live series, and on May 21st, there will be a Supporting the Mental Health of Campus Professionals session. So if you like what you heard here, and which it was fantastic, by the way, thank you. We're going to be continuing the conversation around mental health, and so please join us for that. You can go on to, I put a link in the chat to the SUNY SAIL website and the webinars page, and you can register right there. That'll also be where we will have the recording of this session today. So thank you all.
Yes, thanks, Marissa. And thanks again to Glenn and to our wonderful panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Caroline. I appreciate all the work that you do for SUNY SAIL. Thank you.
Thank you.